Chapter 8, You Will Never Leave Me in This Lifetime. Even though she had to reluctantly return to the Z family home every night, Winnie was still very happy to have seen the sunlight again for the past few days. However, a single sentence from Jiharyang Metro. Those who have seen the light always find it hard to endure the darkness. Wunli might have had a gentle nature, but after Lady Chichang left, she also threw a tantrum, smashing everything in the room that could be smashed. She even refused to have dinner. The butler, carrying the untouched dinner tray, came downstairs, trembling with trepidation, and said to Yi Tingyang, Lady Wen won't open the door. Yi Tingyang's face was frosty, and he got up coldly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sharp, grating noise. The atmosphere in the living room turned to ice, as if one had fallen into an ice cellar, shivering uncontrollably. The surrounding nannies, nieces, and butlers dared not even breathe, doing their best to become invisible. Yi Tingyang walked towards Wenli's room. He twisted the doorknob, but it did not budge, locked from the inside. Before he could say a word, something smashed against the door, and with a crash, pieces fell to the floor. Get lost. Wenli's voice was choked with sobs as she hysterically yelled, Tell Ji Tingyang that unless he lets me out tomorrow, I will starve myself. Ji Tingyang closed his lips that had been about to speak, half his body shrouded in the shadows of the light, his dark pupils growing even more somber and menacing. He turned to the butler next to him and said, Since she wants to starve herself, let her wish be granted. No one is allowed to bring her food. Having said that, he turned and went downstairs. In less than a moment, the sound of a car's engine roared to life in the garage, and it drifted away from the villa, growing fainter and fainter. In the club's private room, several men were cheerfully toasting to Zi Tingyang. President Zi actually chose not to stay at home with the beauty today, but joined us for drinks instead. This is indeed rare, one of them commented. Everyone in the circle knew that Zi Tingyang kept a delicate flower at home. So bewitched was he that he hardly went to the office anymore. Almost Zi Tingyang ignored their teasing and didn't care about how strong the drinks were on the table, just picking them up and guzzling them down. The burning sensation spread from his throat to his stomach and then throughout his body as if it could numb the pain in his heart. Ji Tingyang's expression gradually became vacant, and the exclamations of his good drinking capacity dissipated from his ears. He seemed to return to the afternoon when he first met him. He was 16 then, and it had been 9 years since his parents died. His aunt and uncle reluctantly took in the 3 siblings, lured by their father's substantial inheritance. But that was barely enough to keep them from starving. There wasn't much more. Every morning, before the chauffeur took them to school, Ji Tingyang would see his aunt caressing her son's head with a loving expression, wishing him a happy, safe, and smooth day. And if she was in a good mood, she'd kiss Shook. Every time he saw this scene, Ji Tingyang would miss the gentle visage of his own mother, and the sourness in his heart would churn, causing his eyes to redden before he hastily looked away. His cousin was particularly resentful of them staying at his house and would pick on them on purpose. He would hold back a bit at home, but outside he was unrestrained. One noon after school, Chitenghe was dragged into a corner of the academic building by this cousin and beaten up. Although Rung Tingjian was lean, fighting back was easy for him, but he couldn't, because for every act of resistance, his cousin would seek retribution, doublefold, from his younger brother's building. It didn't matter. He had grown accustomed to it. Once he came of age, he would take back the family inheritance, move out with his brother and sister, and everything would get better. Ji Tingyang comforted himself with this thought, numbing his mind. His vision gradually blurred, and his mind began to swirl with confusion. "What are you doing? Stop it, or I'll call the teacher." The sweet voice, tinged with a barely perceptible tremble, rang out. The girl, who looked much younger than him, was clearly afraid, yet she bravely stepped forward. "Mind your own business, or I'll hit you too," the cousin threatened fiercely. The little girl clutched the straps of her backpack nervously. "I already told the teacher. He'll be here to catch you soon." Telling the teacher was shameful but effective. Teachers naturally intimidated students, and after a few seconds of hesitation, he turned and ran off. Seeing the girl's subtle sigh of relief, Ji Tingyang knew her words were a lie. He slowly got up from the ground, clutching his bruised arm, and made his way step by step toward the school gate. The little girl followed behind him, chattering, "Hey, I helped you, and don't I get even late? Your hand is hurt. Are you going to go back like this? Your family will be worried." Ji Tingyang paused, thought of his younger brother and sister, and for the first time, hesitation crossed his emotionless face. The little girl bit her lip and mustered a second burst of courage, pulling him to sit down on a nearby stone staircase. Then she took several adhesive bandages out of her bag and patched up his wounds. Ji Tingyang remained still, letting her final fuss over him, his attention drawn to a mother and child but outside. The little boy pointed at an ice cream shop, tugging at his mother's sleeve and whining, seemingly wanting some ice cream. The mother squatted down, said something to him that made the boy laugh out loud, and he no longer begged for the ice cream. The mother gently touched the boy's head as if praising his good behavior, causing the boy to blush with a mix of pride and shyness. Ji Tingyang's hand, which hung by his side, clenched involuntarily into a fist. The image of his mother was becoming blurrier. Even the warm feeling of her caress in his memory was fading away. He tried desperately to remember, to recapture that warm sensation of love, to grasp it tightly and never let go. Suddenly, a small hand landed on his head and gave it a gentle rub. The warmth he yearned. Ji Tingyang looked up, his dark pupils narrowing, fixated on the little girl before him. The girl was startled by his ominous gaze, retracting her hand in fear and explaining cautiously, "I saw you looking over there with envy. I thought you might want someone to knit your ad too. Sorry." Had she misunderstood? How embarrassed. Ji Tingyang stood up and grabbed her wrist forcefully, causing her to let out a soft hiss of pain. He opened his mouth, straining his voice that had been silent for too long to utter the first word she heard from him. "What's your name?" When we. In the blink of an eye, the lonely wounded boy had grown up into a grim and frightening man, keeping her captive in a luxurious villa. He gripped her hands above her head, leaned down over her, and pinned her to the bed. Another well-defined hand squeezed her neck, his eyes full of obsession and persistence, clinging to her like a demon. For that engagement contest. "Wenli, you'll never escape me in this lifetime." Chapter 9, Don't Leave Me Behind. Wenli suddenly awoke from her sleep, sitting up and massaging her temples, feeling a trace of dampness before she realized her forehead was covered with cold sweat. She hadn't expected to dream of Ji Tingyang while sleeping. He was not only persistent in reality, but also relentless, even just as she had told Ji Tingyang that day. If she had known he would one day confine her like a vengeful snake trapping its prey, she would have definitely stayed as far away from that corner as possible. She wiped the sweat with the back of her hand, patted her flustered chest, and began to feel calmer when she caught a glimpse of the ringing phone on the bedside. Turning her body, she glanced at the caller ID. It was from Ji Ting-yang. She hesitated for a few seconds between hanging up and answering before finally picking up. "Unless you're calling to tell me you'll let me go out tomorrow, then just forget it. Lady Wen, I'm President Ji's friend. He's had too much drink at the club. Could you come pick him up?" The caller's voice was loud and seemed to be slurred from drinking too much. There had been similar incidents before when Jie Ting-yang got drunk. Someone would always call her without asking to pay. "I'm busy, please call the butler." Wen Li declined as usual without waiting for a response and quickly hung up, then turned off her phone to prevent those people from calling persistently. She then lay back in bed, pulled the covers, and buried her head deep into her bed. On the other hand, the person was practiced. In no time, the butler's phone rang. "Yes, thank you." Lin Shu was just getting water in the kitchen when she came out and heard the butler's frantic "Akmom's over right away." "Where are you going?" she asked casually. The butler, who had not worked for the Ji family for long and therefore did not recognize Lin Ji, had come to understand after a few days that President Ji treated her quite differently. In front of this Miss Lin, President Ji's volatile temper always seemed to become very genuine. He had speculated that maybe Miss Lin was Ji's new love interest, but their interactions did not resemble those of lovers. They seemed more like relatives. But whatever the relationship, he dared not neglect Lin Shu, and so he immediately replied, "Miss Lin, President got drunk at the club. He asked me to go and pick him up." Dwayne, she stared mindfully. "Is it for business?" The butler looked at her and hesitated. "President Ji is probably in a bad mood today." There had been several occasions before when Ji Ting-yang and Wen Li had a huge argument, and he would end up drinking himself into a stupor at the club. Remembering the quarrel between the two that afternoon, this time was likely no exception. Lin Shu also thought of Wen Li upstairs and sighed inwardly. In the club, a few young masters continued to pour drink for Ji Ting-yang, pushing the woman beside them onto him. "President Ji, there are so many women in this world. Why pine for just one? Look at this flower, so delicate and tender. Try her out and you're guaranteed to like her." They all knew Ji Ting-yang was throwing his life away over a woman who didn't appreciate him. They didn't normally connect, but whenever they were called out to drink, it was clear Ji Ting-yang got hurt by his canary at home. It was drowning his sorrow. They were curious about what kind of woman could drive Ji Ting-yang to this state of utter despair. However, Jiu Ting-yang kept that woman very closely protected. No one had ever seen her, only knew a name, Wen Li. Though they were just fair weather friends, they still tried to persuade Ji Qi not to hang himself over Wing Ling. In the midst of their talk, one young master pushed the woman against Ji Ting-yang's arm. Ji Ting-yang's brows were tightly furrowed, and his gloomy, cold eyes swept over the woman before he spat out a chilling word. The woman was so frightened by his intimidating gaze that she felt a chill in her heart. Her heart trembled, but she dared not get any closer. "Worthless! You are useless, even when given an opportunity," the young master disdainfully pulled the woman aside. He turned his head and scolded the club manager. "But didn't you see that President Ji is dissatisfied with the women here? What other beauties do you have? Yes, I'll call them right away." The manager nodded and bowed profusely. After a moment, a woman pushed the door open, and the woman was wearing a form-fitting lawn dress, perfectly showcasing her exquisite figure. She walked slowly, in delicate white high heels, and her chestnut-colored long hair was casually draped over her shoulders, unstyled. Her delicate features were stunningly beautiful and luminous. Her pale white skin appeared even more like creamy jade under the light. The eyes of the young masters in the private room brightened instantly, their faces full of eagerness. Only one thought remained in their minds. Such a beauty. The young master nearest to the door had the advantage of proximity and quickly stood up to greet her. He reached out to embrace her slender waist, but she deftly avoided him. Normally, he would have cursed a few words at her prudishness, but now he couldn't muster any irritation and even consoled himself. It's all right, beauties are entitled to their caprices. Miss, may I ask how to address you? He asked with a smile. My surname is Lin. Miss Lin, shall we have a drink? No, thank you. I'm here for Jitingyang. Vaisheng. She looked around the private room, and upon seeing Young, she walked straight over and took the wine glass from his hand. Stop drinking. We should go home now. His home. His consciousness was... His home had scattered 20 years ago. Lin Jing's voice was soft as she stroked his head. Yes, we're going home. I'm here to pick you up. Ji Ting-yang looked up. The person in front of him seemed flurry. He strained his eyes, trying to make out who she was. And finally, he recognized the person from deep within his memory. Ji Ting-yang grasped her hand in disbelief, his voice as light as if a breeze could blow it away. His grip grew tighter, as though he wanted to clutch her to him forever. His voice was so fragile. Don't leave me behind. Don't leave the three of them alone in this world. A sharp pain suddenly shot through Linsu's chest, as if it was being pricked by dense needles, and the corners of her eyes reddened. I'm sorry, I won't leave you behind again. I'll take you home now. Is that okay? Ji Ting-yang nodded and stood up obediently, but his hand still clung to her fearfully. The young masters in the private room were dumbfounded by Ji Ting-yang's compliant behavior toward this milk. They hadn't heard Ji Ting-yang's reference to Lin Zhu. They only heard his plea for her not to leave him behind. Could this person be his lounge girl? But the woman clearly stated her surname was Lin. So was Ji Ting-yang drowning his sorrows in alcohol tonight because of another woman? Chapter 9. As Lin Xu was about to leave with Ji Ting-yang, a man hurriedly spoke up. Hey, don't go just yet. Lin Xu turned back. Is there something else? The man, also slightly drunk, stood up and staggered over, his eyes fixed intently on Lin Xu. Don't rush off. You're already here. Why don't we all have a few drinks together? Ji Ting-yang is intoxicated. I need to take him home first, Lin Xu gently replied. As for whether she would come back after taking him home, that was another matter altogether. The man, under the influence of alcohol, evidently couldn't understand the subtext in her words and pointed to a sofa nearby. Just throw him on the couch to sleep it off. Come on, let's have a few drinks. As he spoke, he reached out to pull Lin's shoe. Many men in the club, once drunk, seemed to reveal their true nature, liking to make unwanted advances on young women. Lin Shu's brows furrowed, and she was about to dodge to the side. Someone preempted her by stopping the man's actions. His hand was restrained, and the person held him with considerable strength. He tried to retract his hand, but couldn't break free. Who is it? The man looked up, annoyed, and glared over, but the next second his eyes met Ji Ting-yang's dark gaze. Ji Ting-yang's previously hazy demeanor was gone, replaced by a terrifying coldness in his eyes, and a faint menace emanated from his person. Don't touch her. The pressure from Ji Ting-yang's hand grew heavier, and his grasp made bones creak ominously as if they were about to break. The man suddenly felt sober from the pain. with cold sweat beading on his forehead, and he pleaded, "Yes, yes, President Ji, I was all wrong. Please let me go." Lin Shu placed her hand on Jita Yang's arm, signaling something, and it wasn't until Lin Shu and Ji Yang had left that the frozen atmosphere seemed to thaw, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. "Otlan, you even dare to mess with Ji Yang's people. Are you tired of living?" someone chided nearby. The man rubbed his wrist, which was still sore, and was filled with fear. "I was just drunk. Why didn't any of you stop me?" They all knew that the last person who had verbally harassed Wenli from afar was run into the ground financially by Ji's company. That person hadn't even met Wenli and ended up at such a place. If he had actually made a move just now, heaven knows what terrifying consider followed him. However, after this incident, they all reached a consensus in their minds. Ji Qiongzheng had finally cast aside the canaries from his home and had found a new love. And the new love that everyone speculated about was at that thing. Since leaving the club, Ji Tingyang had sobered up quite a bit. He glanced at Lin Shen next to him, and seeing that she was silent, he became increasingly anxious. It seemed like just a few days ago, Lin Shen had said that if he went to nightclubs to learn bad habits, she wouldn't allow him to come home. Though that wasn't quite right, he had just been to a private club. With this thought, Uchid Aing straightened his back. "Were those people your friends?" Lin Zhu was the first to break the silence in the car. Ji Tingyang couldn't quite gauge the meaning of her question. "Not really." Those few people looked unreliable at a glance, talking often to talk slick about manners. They start pawing at a girl the moment they see nothing. In just a few minutes, a brief encounter with those men. Stay away from them in the future if you can. Just be careful you don't get led astray. It's as if becoming a mother imbues a love for nagging at their children, admonishing them not to do this or that. In the past, Ji Tingyang always heard his classmates complain about how annoying their mothers were, even interfering with whom they befriended. At that time, he couldn't help but envy and wonder what would have feel like, as it did not tend to be like. Ji Tingyang's body relaxed, leaning against the back seat, a faint, almost imperceptible smile curling on his lips. Listening to the unending chatter beside his ear, he felt an inexplicable warmth in his chest. Suddenly, the nagging voice came to an automatic halt. "Am I being too meddlesome?" Lin Su's eyes flashed with a hint of annoyance. She remembered that many rebellious kids began their defiance because of too much parental control, eventually leading to discord within the family. As a child, she hated her parents' constant nagging in her ear and had secretly vowed never to become such a person, aspiring to be a new Erald mother. Before heading to the club, she had braced herself, but upon arriving and seeing Ji Tingyang being dragged around, drunk to the point of oblivion, anger still flared up inside her. She had held back her frustration all the way, yet in the end, she couldn't help but give him a dressing down. Thinking about how she had inevitably become the very person she despised when she grew up, Lin Chu's emotions suddenly plummeted. Anyone unaware of the situation might have assumed Lin Xiu was the one who just received a lecture. Ji Jingyang immediately took a stance. "No, you can manage however you want." However, his words failed to lift her sagging spirits. Ji Tingyang opened his mouth to speak, but unfortunately he too was a president who loved to lecture on ordinary days, and now he couldn't muster any words of comfort. His mind raced, and, catching a glimpse of a barbecue stall outside the car, He quickly said, "Let's go have some barbecue." At a roadside stall, Lin Shu's table was covered with plate after plate of grilled meat skewers, emitting a tantalizing aroma after being roasted over charcoal. Taking a beef skewer to her mouth, the tender juices burst in her mouth as she happily swung her legs back and forth as if the previous heaviness in the car was just an illusion. Ji Yang secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Thankfully, he remembered his mother loved barbecues, and whenever she felt down, his father would sneak her out. When they returned home, his mother's mood would always be exceptionally joyful and buoyant. The two of them thought they were hiding it well, yet they overlooked the scent of barbecue on their clothes. Every time he saw them acting secretively, he would sneer with disdain. Isov. He didn't like the roadside stalls at all, not sanitary in the slightest, and even if they took him there, he wouldn't go. Yet he hadn't expected that one day he would take the initiative to bring Lin Shu to a roadside barbecue stall. "This lamb skewer is delicious. Try by." Lin Shu offered the skewer in her hand to him. Ji Yang took it from her, looking at the meat skewer before him, and after hesitating for a moment under Lin Shu's expectant gaze, he bit into it. Not bad. It was actually pretty delusive. Lin Shu's eyes crinkled with joy. "Your dad used to sneak meat up from his barbecue all the time. He had always wanted to invite you and your siblings too. But your dad said it was our own little world just for the two of them." Ji Yang fell silent. That was entirely like someday that man who used to monopolize his mother's. Lin Shu said, "I always regretted not being able to go out for barbecue together. But now that wish has come true. If next time we could also invite Yujilins, your sister, that would be even better." Be greeted. Take most of the longs on both sides of the table, while Marty watched inclined